Coming up, U.S. employee rights under the National Labor Relations Act and the Railway Labor Act. Activate Live starts now.
Activate your voice. Activa tu voz. Activate it now.
Speak up. Speak out. Get involved. Get involved.
Engage-toi.
Take action.
Aktiviere deine Stimme.
We're union and we're proud.
Welcome to Activate Live. I'm Tanya Hutchins. This is our first show of the new year, a time for new beginnings, fresh starts, whatever you want to call it. It's also National Mentoring Month, so a shout out to all of the mentors and mentees out there. We're going to refresh our memories about workers' rights in just a few moments. We'll get to that. But first, members of the IAM Local 2301 in Montreal, Canada are on strike at two airports. The workers at Swissport Canada Incorporated perform aircraft refueling operations at Montreal Trudeau and Mirabel airports. At issue is the use of managers to maintain fueling operations and high turnover of staff. The workers' collective bargaining agreement expired last August, despite trying to reach an agreement since last May. In British Columbia, 60 IAM members at 3 car dealerships are still on strike after at least 6 rounds of bargaining since September. Their contract expired at the end of August. A business representative there says the dealerships are asking for numerous changes, like mandatory overtime. Members want a fair contract with fair wages and wage parity among the dealerships. Guide Dogs of America works with various partners, and you may have heard how GDA donated a dog named Jayco to the Enterprise Police Department in Alabama. Jayco is assigned to community policing. In other GDA news, the organization has officially merged with Tender Loving Canines Assistance Dogs, which provides independence to veterans and people with autism.
We did this merger because the purpose of Guide Dogs of America is to put more service dogs in the hands of people that need them, and we found that, through this merger, we're going to be able to make that possible by assisting veterans and assisting children with autism, putting facility dogs out there. And also on the fourth part of it is we're helping rehabilitate prisoners along the way too.
Tender Loving Canines will retain its name and offices in San Diego, while Guide Dogs of America will still be based in Sylmar, California. Programs and services are offered free of charge to people in the United States and Canada. Well, if you're a union member, you know that unions are under attack on the federal, state, and local levels. But we still have rights, laws on the books aimed at protecting us as American workers. Joining us now to refresh our memories is IAM General Counsel Mark Schneider. Thanks for being here, Mark.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, too. Well, this is a time to refresh our memories about all of our rights. But first, before we talk about certain laws that protect us, why do we have these laws in the first place when we look back historically?
Well, our history on this is sad and bad. The country started with indentured servants and slaves. The free labor was really not a common thing. And when unions came about, they were found to be illegal criminal conspiracies. And the courts, as well as people getting beat up endlessly, the courts were striking down and putting union leaders in jail. So the situation became intolerable, and it is in that context that we got our labor laws. It was an attempt to make unions legal where they had been criminal.
That is incredible, just to think of us being illegal.
Yeah.
Now, we have certain laws on the books. One of them is the National Labor Relations Act. Explain to us what that is.
Sure. That's the principal labor law covering most private sector employees, and most private sector employees, by which I mean it doesn't cover federal government employees, doesn't cover state employees, it doesn't cover, and I think we'll talk about this later, employees in the rail and air industries. And sadly, it excludes some employees that should be covered, domestic workers, to pick one example of many. But most private sector employees are covered by the National Labor Relations Act.
Now, there's certain rights under this act, and let's go through some of them that are listed on the website, which you just saw there. Forming or attempting to form a union in the workplace. A lot of people don't know that they have the right to do that.
No, and that is the main thing that was a criminal conspiracy before this law. You couldn't join together. The feeling was you were engaged in a criminal cartel activity. You were trying to join together to stop the business. But you have that right, and that's been consistent throughout the history of the Act. You can form a union, you can join a union that already exists, And that is really the right from which everything else flows. It's an important, critical right, and that really is not under attack. I mean, that's understood.
How key is this second point here about joining a union, whether recognized by your employer or not?
Right. It doesn't matter whether the employer thinks it's a good idea or a bad idea. And it doesn't matter whether the company thinks that you shouldn't join a union. You have a right. You have a right even though the employer thinks you shouldn't do it. And you can't be fired by the employer for trying to form a union or for advocating for a union. So it's, in our view in particular, really none of the employer's business. If the employees want to unionize, they have that right.
And a lot of fear may exist with people that don't know their rights. What about this third one here about assisting a union that comes in terms of organizing?
Right. If you know, somebody hears about the machinists union because they have a brother or a sister that's a member in somewhere else, and they say, you know, I think the machinists union would help us, and they invite the union in and say, we, you know, try to organize our facility. We could really be helped by this union. They have that right, and you could help a union. I mean, a union really, after all, is just the workers.
Right, right.
I mean, it's a democratic organization formed by workers, elected by workers. The leadership is elected and unelected by workers. But if you want to help a union or union, by all means, it's legal, permitted, and the employer cannot discipline you or punish you for doing that. It's critical.
Okay, tell us about these other rights that are listed as well.
Well, you're not required to join a union. It's your choice. It's the employee's choice. And more to the point, when you have a union, that union represents you. So, for example, if you're disciplined, you can bring your union representative in with you and make sure the discipline is fair and appropriate. So, yes, once they're in the workplace, the union comes in and has a formal role in the employee relations.
Now, in terms of which activities are covered, I know we have a list also of activities that are covered outside of a union. Does that mean if you don't yet have a union, what your rights are as a worker?
Absolutely. If you and I, well, we do. We both work at the machinist union, as it happens. If we have a complaint, and even if we weren't represented by a union, and we want to talk to each other about our complaint about the workplace, we have a right to do that. Even if we're not represented, even if we don't really have any interest in being represented, we still have a right to jointly go to our employer and say, we don't think this is right, you should change this. That's a right under the labor law. So yeah, it's an important thing, it's often forgotten.
You know, I remember having a personal services contract, which was just for me. It was person to person when I was a reporter. And in there it said that you can't talk about your pay with other workers. So does this fall in line with that of you can discuss work-related issues, like if safety, for instance, if something unsafe is happening in your workplace?
It's exactly so. Even if you have nothing to do with a union or don't want a union, even if you feel that your workplace is unsafe and you want to talk together about that and then bring your complaints to the employer, that's protected activity. And the employer cannot discipline you for coming together and talking about that. So yeah, it's important. And you know, from a point of view, from a union point of view, that's important because that's really that's how unions start. After all, when people realize they have power, not as an individual in the workplace, but as a group. That is a union. That's what union means. So that's how unions start. When you and I work together and we have a problem, we think, well, by myself, I can't really do much about that problem. But if I talk to all 10 of us and we go to the employer and say, hey, you need to fix this. This is unsafe. That's strength in numbers, and that's the whole idea behind a union.
And improving working conditions is a good thing. I mean, improving safety is a good thing.
Right. It helps everybody. It helps the economy. It helps. It's only fair. In fact, to look at it the way you've asked about it, it's sort of sad there has to be a law about this, isn't there? It ought to just be obvious that you should be able to talk about things like safety or pay or any other unfair conditions in the workplace, mistreatment.
So you mentioned this a little bit earlier about who's covered and who's not covered by the National Labor Relations Act. Let's look at a list now of who is covered and who's excluded.
Right. As I said before, most private sector employees are covered. And there are exceptions that are grounded in really bad history, like domestic workers. I mean, why are they accepted? Well, because they don't have power. And there have been attempts to amend the labor law. This one stuff always seems like, and then one of them is always to extend the coverage to all private and sector employees, which really ought to happen. But most private sector employees and employers are covered. If you work for the federal government, they have their own labor law systems. It's very similar, based on the National Labor Relations Act, but it's got differences. One important difference is they can't really bargain about wages. It's a small matter, but state and local governments all have their own labor laws. Again, mostly patterned on the federal law, but there's differences. Often the right to strike is not something available under state and local labor laws.
So much more restrictive.
They can be more restrictive. And as I said, there are some private sector employees that aren't covered. It's a disgrace, in my opinion, and they really should be, but they're listed there: agricultural laborers, domestic service. These are the people with the least power. The people that need union most, you might say, are not covered. And that last one is, it's true, but it's not much talked about. Employed by parent or spouse, yeah.
I don't know if I could work with a parent or spouse, but
hadn't been brought to my attention in a while, that one.
But it's there. I guess a dispute can come up with anyone.
Independent contractors is much in the news. I mean, I don't know if you've read about, Uber and Lyft, and all these companies are claiming their people are, if you're not an employee, well, then you're not covered. And Uber says about all its drivers, well, they're not really employees of ours. They're just like independent businesses that are choosing to pick up rides on our system.
But they have to abide by
our
Uber's rules, right?
Yeah, indeed. That, I mean, again, it makes sense in a way. If you are actually a business, you shouldn't be able to get together with other businesses and collude over. That would violate the antitrust laws. So that's kind of what it meant to be. But it's been expanded to independent contractors now. They're saying that supervisors are excluded, and as I said, people who are subject to air and rail employees are excluded. The independent contractor thing, you're seeing a lot in the news these days, what that really means, who should be covered, who's not.
I think there's a lot of confusion over that.
There is a lot of confusion, and the states are stepping in where the federal government hasn't. There's activity, I know, in California, New York, New Jersey, about who should be covered, if not under federal law, at least under state law, who's an independent contractor. There also, you see in the fast food business, people that work for McDonald's, well, they're technically employed by a franchisee, some guy who owns a particular store.
Okay.
Is McDonald's the employer, or is that franchisee the employer? Or are they joint employers? Those kinds of questions come up a lot as well.
Yeah, perception. There's a big golden arch outside.
Seems like if they're making your wages and they're making you wear a uniform and setting your hours, maybe they ought to be considered an employer.
Exactly. I wish there were more education about that.
Yeah.
But hopefully, hopefully the law will catch up to what's happening in each industry.
It can be very frustrating, let me say, but yes, we work every day to make it catch up.
Well, you mentioned the Railway Labor Act, and here at the Machinists Union, we have a very large transportation territory. Tell us a little bit about the Railway Labor Act.
Sure, that actually was the first big labor law. It came before the National Labor Relations Act. There was so much disruption on the rails, there were no airlines then, that the management and rail labor got together with the unions and said, we need to work something out because we're having too many stoppages, this is not okay. And they cut a deal. And that Railway Labor Act is the deal that they cut. So it's an odd law, but it establishes, sort of similar to the National Labor Relations Act, established right to collectively bargain, it established grievance and arbitration procedures, it set up a board, the National Mediation Board, which
Is that who enforces this act?
Yeah, I mean, it's in some little respects different than the National Labor Relations Board, in some respects the same. But yes, they have general enforcement authority. And that law, even though it's one of the very first laws in the administrative state when these laws began happening, has in some ways held up better than the National Labor Relations Act. It's served us well. The two main differences are because these rail systems and the air systems are nationwide, the bargaining units are nationwide. So in a General Electric shop, even though they may have shops across the country, tends to be each shop has its own bargaining unit. In the airlines and the railroads, you represent everybody. So all the flight attendants are represented in one union, in one bargaining unit. Makes it a little harder to organize. You have to organize, you have to get everybody all across the system. But once organized, that's a lot of people and more bargaining power. So there's that difference. And the way they dealt with contracts was a little different. In the National Labor Relations Act, contracts tend to be 3-4 years long. And when they end, and you have to bargain for a new one. In the Railway Labor Act, they kind of go on forever. And
is it like auto-renewing, or is it just always in effect?
there's an amendable date. It's a different kind of process, but the changing of it's different. There's a whole legal process that goes to the National Mediation Board. There are boards set up. The contract process is just a different process than what was set up under the National Labor Relations Act. We are always in our union, seems to be there's some contract that's reached its amendable date. We're in negotiations. They can seem to go on forever. It can be very frustrating. Whereas the National Labor Relations Act, the contract expires, you have a right to strike, and usually there's a new deal struck, pretty quickly. Under the Railway Labor Act, you have to be released to strike, and it can be an interminable process.
We have a presidential election year coming up. This is the year, 2020. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What effect do political party changes, have on enforcements of these laws?
Yeah, more than they ought to, in my opinion, quite a bit. I mean, the National Labor Relations Board, let's go there, that's the big one. It's a 5-member board, and the custom is 3 members are appointed by the party in power, are members of the party in power, and 2 are members of the other party. Okay. So there will be 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats right now. Okay.
And are these entities fully staffed?
They're not.
Okay.
What's happened right now, it's really quite unusual, is the 2 Democratic positions, the time has run out, and there are just 3 Republicans, no Democrats right now.
That does not seem fair at all.
No, it does not seem fair at all, and it's quite unusual.
And I'm an independent, okay? I'm going to tell you that right now. I'm an independent saying that.
It's what you get because of this 3-2 switch, you tend to see one kind of labor law decision coming out of a Democratic board and a slightly, maybe slightly more pro-union. And then when the Republicans take power, the Republican board, maybe a slightly more employer-focused law. So you get this kind of oscillation over the years. Right now, living through it, it's pretty extreme, the oscillation we're seeing. We're seeing some very employer-friendly decisions coming out of this labor board and some what labor views as hostile decisions coming out of this labor board as compared to the board that President Obama had picked. So you do get this oscillation. Some of that's maybe for the good, right? Reflects changes in the country. But right now we're in a pretty extreme form of it, probably more than is healthy.
So it goes through cycles every 4 to 8 years.
It goes through cycles, and in the courts where we practice, there's precedent, and the courts tend to honor the precedent. So there's a lot of stability in the law. Mm-hmm. Even if they don't like the law, the judges say, well, I may not like it myself, but this is the way the courts have ruled in the past. In the National Labor Relations Board, they do a little of that, and they pay lip service to that, but you see them overturning each other's decisions quite a bit. So the Obama board will make a certain set of rulings, and then he'll lose his election, and the next guy will come in, and they'll reverse those decisions. And then the next guy will come in, and they'll reverse back. So you see this oscillation.
Wouldn't it be so much easier if they would just do the right thing for workers?
Yes, it would. We're having a very challenging time now. We think what's happening is unfair. I mean, a certain amount of it I think you have to accept. There's the honest difference of opinion about the right way to manage some of these things. And the issues can be pretty picayune, in the weeds. But right now we're feeling some extreme change in a way that I think isn't good for the system. Rather than relying on what's there, so everybody knows what the rules are when they follow them, I think the employers now feel like, well, we can do anything, and maybe they'll change the rule. And it doesn't lead for good relations. I think it'd just be better to have a more stable system.
I agree. There are times when we have action alerts, and we tell our members and workers in general to call Congress or write to Congress. When you have these entities like the National Labor Relations Board and the National Mediation Board, do workers have voices? Are they able to give input? How do they receive input from workers?
Yeah, they do and they don't.
Okay.
I think what the main thing that happens is that the unions representing worker interests. And the unions have a say for sure. And most things in the National Labor Relations Act are decided in contested cases. So the union will be on one side, the employer will be on the other side. And sometimes there are individuals that aren't union that have a role, or advocacy groups that aren't employers. But generally it's union and employers, and they each have a say. So the workers have a say generally through their union in these cases, and the employers have a say through the employer groups. So that's how it works. You're always free to write, and be upset. And I do wish people. I know people have different views, certainly do in our union, about politics, who's the right president and so forth. But I wish people would study carefully these labor board decisions and see what's happening. Because a lot of them, I think, whether you're a Republican or Democrat, I think if you would think were unfair. And I wish that was better well known, because maybe that would affect these people's behavior. And it might affect people the way you think of voting. I mean, you may have some reason to vote for the current president or not, but maybe this ought to be a reason too, if you think that the current National Labor Relations Board isn't treating workers fairly. It's something you ought to consider.
And there's a lot of information on the website. I mean, if you go to the website, initially we showed the one from the National Labor Relations Board, but there was information for employees, for employers, for unions, just a plethora of information. So hopefully people can go here.
Yeah, they should look, and and there are people that get treated unfairly by unions. For example, I'm never in our union. I like to think.
Right.
I certainly hope not. But go there and find out what that's about. But yes, they have a lot of information. It's good information, and the board, those 5-person board changes, most of the staff, that stays the same. So there's an awful lot of very good people who aren't on the employer side or the union side, that are just trying to enforce the law, that work at the National Labor Relations Board. They're trying to do their jobs. So, and they run those web pages, and yeah, it's full of good information, and people ought to check it out.
Well, thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to mention? Oh, we have a comment here from Brian Steinmax. He's saying the highly politicized NLRB has been attacking workers' rights at every opportunity. It is an absolute travesty what they are doing.
Well, I have to say I agree with you, Brian. They've had, just the last 3 weeks, it's been called the December Massacre. They issued a whole series of decisions on wearing union badges, or union security clauses, or the ability to use employer email systems to talk to fellow workers, stuff that ought to be clear. Yeah, we're in a tough place, and what you need to know about our union is we're fighting every day to do the best we can. And we certainly have my own personal views about how that could be changed. But people ought to educate themselves, see what the labor board is doing, and hopefully they find that important and a reason to get out there and get active.
And Juliana Helminski here saying hello from I Am Delta. That's one of our, someone from the airlines that we're trying to organize.
God bless I Am Delta. We talk about Delta. We talked about Delta today. That's a case of, again, that's the airline, so that's system-wide. So I don't know if that member is a member of flight. We're organizing several different groups, or maybe that woman's a flight attendant. All across the system, we're trying to organize all the flight attendants at Delta Airlines. They deserve a union. They deserve a union, and they've been unfairly denied a union. And we are working ceaselessly to get them one.
We are working, and we're hearing a lot of support from people like Juliana, or Juliana, I'm not sure which way she pronounces it, but we appreciate her writing in to show her support as well. So thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you.
Come back anytime.
It's always a pleasure.
Okay, thanks so much. So what do you think about these laws and your rights as a worker? Activate your voice using live chat on YouTube, comments on Facebook, or by replying to this video on Twitter. You can still participate during the replay. Well, kids say the darndest things. Watch a girl named Michaela explain what a union is to her brother, and watch his reaction.
A union is a group of people that, they come together, and different cultures and different sides of the country, different states come together, and they work on things, or they talk about things, and they're united. And that's kind of like the IAM.
Michaela is 11 years old now, but was actually 10 when that video was recorded. You can find the video on our main YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter pages. Just search Machinist Union. Well, here's a look back at This Week in Labor History. On January 8th, 1939, the Screen Guild Theater radio show aired its first program. The Screen Actors Guild used the program to raise money for the actors in need, including elderly actors. And on January 8th, 1945, the American Federation of Labor granted a charter to the Office Employees International Union, which changed its name to Office and Professional Employees International Union in 1965. Well, if you're a member of the IAM, one of the benefits of your union membership is the ability to take classes at the Wimpesinger Education and Technology Center in Maryland. There are no classes this week, but negotiation prep takes place next week. It's time to register for the Federal Employee Program. The deadline has been extended to January 10th, which is this Friday. Due to limited class size, only those who have not taken the class before may enroll. If you want to take the Employee Assistance Program class, get your applications in by January 13th. And if you'd like to take Intermediate Web Development in April, the deadline is February 14th. And if you plan to take the leadership programs in March or April, those deadlines are approaching quickly, so get your applications in ASAP. You can visit wimpesinger.iamaw.org for more specific information, and the schedule is all online. Well, here's a list of our upcoming state council meetings. The Indiana State Council of Machinists meets January 19th to the 21st in Indianapolis, and the Florida State Council meets January 26th to the 30th in Tallahassee. The third Women's March on Washington takes place January 18th in the nation's capital. Women are marching to protect women's rights, working women's rights, and equality for all. The Coalition of Labor Union Women is a partner, and the hashtags that are being used online gearing up for this march are Rise Up, Women Rise, and Women's March 2020. Don't forget to register for IAM2020.org so you can take part in the IAM's presidential endorsement process. This is for union members who are part of the Machinists Union. IAM2020.org. That's all for this episode of Activate Live. Thanks for joining us. Support your union siblings. Pass along this video to your local or district. And thanks to all of you who already do. We'll see you next Wednesday when we speak with Elise Bryant, President of the Coalition of Labor Union Women.